So hello guys, and welcome to another episode of Question Block. And the last question was, what is your favorite Nintendo controller? There are quite a lot of Nintendo controllers that have been released over the years, but some of them can be a bit weird, while others could be amazing. So let's get into the responses here and discuss what some people think. So Starchronic said, the Nintendo Switch Pro controller is the most comfortable Nintendo controller I've ever used. The sticks are responsive, and buttons are perfectly aligned, with hand placement. 10 out of 10. Yeah, I mostly agree with that. The Switch Pro controller is honestly one of my favorite Nintendo controllers. Honestly, I would say that it's tied as my favorite. And I'll get into my other favorite in a little bit. But the Switch Pro controller, like you said, the button placement is amazing, everything feels so responsive, and it's just a very high quality controller overall. Honestly, I think it's like the opposite of Joy-Cons. Like, Joy-Cons kind of feel flimsy and have bad analog sticks, and it just feels very weird to hold sometimes, but the Pro controller doesn't have any of those problems. Like, the analog sticks are great, it feels very comfortable, and is honestly my go-to controller when playing most Switch games, when I'm not playing it in handheld mode. The only problem that I have with it is the D-pad, but honestly, when I use this controller, I'm not really using it for playing games that are centered around the D-pad, so I don't really mind that much. I usually have other controllers that I use with a better D-pad, but this is just a great controller overall, and I really like the different, like, themed Pro controllers that Nintendo has made. Kind of like the Zelda one, or Tears of the Kingdom. That's the one that I have, and it's really cool. The design is great. They also made, like, a Splatoon one, actually two Splatoon Pro controllers, and a Xenoblade 2 one. They made a few others for various games, but it's just a great controller in general, and it's definitely the best controller for the Switch that Nintendo makes themselves. I'm sure there's some third-party, like, developers that have made, like, better controllers and things. So, yeah, let's move on to the next reply here. So, Lemon Quack said, the Wii Remote is simply designing genius. Enough buttons to get the job done, intuitive motion controls, easy to pick up and play for newcomers, and it looks slick. Yeah, the Wii Remote is a pretty interesting controller. I think it's definitely better than the Joy-Cons, especially for motion controls. And it's just very nice overall. Like, you could use it for many different playstyles. Like, you could kind of have it with the nunchuck plugged in if you're playing like a more intense game or one that requires a lot more buttons and analog controls, kind of like Super Mario Galaxy, the Zelda games, and different things like that. Then you could also have it like upright without the nunchuck for more motion control oriented games, or have it on its side for like side scrollers and 2D platformers like New Super Mario Bros. Wii and Super Paper Mario, different things like that. It just works really well for so many different games, and it's just so simple and designed pretty well. But yeah, I just think the Wii Mode is a pretty good controller in general. So, Cooper Productions 64 said, the Wii U GamePad. Just using the controller just feels natural with every Wii U game that I play. The analog sticks are so nice to use. The buttons are well spaced and not annoying to me. The touchscreen is large, but it doesn't feel clunky to use. I don't know, it's just hard to describe, but using the Wii U GamePad is very enjoyable to me. Yeah, the Wii U GamePad is pretty interesting. Like, I like it. I actually do like the Wii U GamePad, but I do have some issues with it. I know you said you didn't really mind it being clunky, but I do think it feels a bit awkward at times, but it does feel good to hold. Like, it does feel, like, honestly, a little better than holding the Switch in handheld mode, because it does kind of have, like, a better grip to it. It feels more ergonomic, and it does feel, like, pretty good overall. The one thing that is a bit weird is the screen, because it is in 480p and it does look a bit cheap. I mean, I wouldn't say the gamepad overall is cheap, because it does feel mostly high quality, but the screen could have been better. I know it was 2012 when it released, but I do feel like they could have done a little better than 480p even then, but yeah, I would say it's a pretty solid controller overall. Like, the ways that they've used it on the Wii U, while some people feel that there was a lot of missed potential, I feel like there were a lot of cool uses of it, like in between certain games, and then also the DS Virtual Console. I think that was great, the way that they used that. Honestly, probably the best retro re-release that Nintendo has ever done, or how they've handled it. Because that was absolutely amazing how you could actually play DS games on the TV officially like that, and also have a touchscreen to use along with it. I don't think that many people really kind of see how interesting that was with how they've handled the Virtual Console on the Wii U. It's going to be hard to re-release DS games from this point forward. I know they just did the Another Code Recollection recently, but they're really gonna have to kind of do some workarounds for like re-releasing these DS games, but we'll have to see. I just think the Wii U gamepad worked really well for things like that. So Tom Tendo said, nothing can beat the original Super Nintendo controller. Iconic yet comfortable. The NSO version is also the best wireless one. Try it with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Yeah, the Super Nintendo controller is timeless. I think it's just a very nice controller overall, and I think it aged really well for like 2D games specifically. I mean, obviously you're gonna need a modern controller when playing like 3D games, but for 2D games and retro games, this is the go-to controller. It is really good overall. I mean, I know there are some controllers that have like more functions, and some people do prefer the Sega Genesis controller as well, and I completely understand that for certain games especially, but for classic Nintendo games, the Super Nintendo controller is just great. You really can't go wrong with it. Especially the one that they released for NSO, like you mentioned, that is very high quality, and I like that you can use it with other games as well. I think you can even use it with the Super Mario RPG Remake, since the remake has, like, D-pad controls. I know some of the menus might be, like, hard to navigate, or there might be, like, some problems with that, but I think the game, for the most part, would be able to function pretty well with the SNES controller. So, I think it's just a great controller overall. And it was basically the blueprint for, like, controllers after that. Like, almost every controller, every traditional controller is kind of based on the SNES controller. It basically uses the same basic layout. Like, between all of the other companies, like, even Sony or Microsoft, like, they basically kind of used a similar layout. But, yeah, I think the SNES controller is just great overall. So, Jaden the Red Fox said, the GameCube controller. Need I say more? Oh yeah, the GameCube controller is definitely tied as my favorite Nintendo controller of all time. Like I was saying earlier with like the Pro controller is amazing, but the GameCube controller is also just excellent in general. And it does things that modern Nintendo controllers, even the Pro controller, doesn't do. And with the analog triggers, that is one of the best features about the GameCube controller. Like, it just feels so good to use. I just like that click, like when you press it down and everything. I know a lot of other modern controllers have analog triggers, but for some reason Nintendo only did it with the GameCube and hasn't done it since. I know Nintendo like frequently re-releases the GameCube controller, especially when a new Smash game releases, and there's even a recent rumor that they're gonna do it, or there was like a patent or something, I don't know. But I really wish that they had the analog triggers on modern Nintendo controllers. Like the Pro controller, that would have been perfect to have on the Pro controller, but the GameCube controller is just great. The button layout is really nice. I know some people think it's a bit weird, but for the games that you'll mostly be using it for, like Smash, or even like other things like Paper Mario, or even like some of other, like a lot of other Nintendo games, like even like, just other, like Mario Kart and different things like that, I still think it's just a very nice controller to use for that. It's just very nice overall. But I do feel like it is a bit weird in some aspects. Like the D-pad isn't great, and I do think the C-stick could be better as well, since this controller is from 2001, and that's when 3D was still starting to take off. So if Nintendo makes a revised version of the GameCube controller, like with this recent like rumor that has been going out, like if they make like a revised version with a better C-stick and also like another bumper and a few other like modern aspects and a better D-pad, this would be the perfect controller. But yeah, the GameCube controller is just like a great controller overall. So Aaron MM said, I don't know, but I like using the Nintendo 64 controller because I can play Zelda Ocarina of Time or Mario 64 with it. Plus, I can play South Park 64. The Nintendo 64 controller, I don't think it's bad, but I do think it is kind of dated, like with how it's designed. It's like, it is like a very, like, we'll get into this in a little bit since another commenter said this, but it's just like such a weirdly designed controller. And I mean, for the time, it made sense, since this is the first 3D Nintendo controller. Well, a controller made for playing 3D games. It isn't bad. Like, it's still fun to use sometimes. But especially when playing Mario 64. Like, playing Mario 64 with the N64 controller is great. But it didn't really age well and is not very usable with many modern games. So, it's just alright. Like, it is, like, I still think it's good in some aspects, but it's just kind of weird and dated in a lot of ways. Great for Nintendo 64 games, not so great for many consoles after that. But, I don't know. It's still a decent controller overall, and it still is a fun novelty when you're playing older games, especially Nintendo 64 games, but I don't know, it is kind of interesting. So Clifford Longhead said, I was gonna pick the GameCube, but it was already taken, so I guess the Switch Pro controller, because it doesn't have Joy-Con drift, unlike the Joy-Cons. Yeah, I guess you're kind of similar to me in the sense that we both, like, really like the Pro controller and the GameCube controller, and like you said, it doesn't have the Joy-Con drift. I mean, there's obviously going to be some instances where some people have, like, analog stick drift with the Pro controller, but it's not very common, and the analog sticks are pretty good on the Pro controller, so I definitely agree. They're, like, way better than the Joy-Cons, and it's really definitely my go-to Nintendo Switch controller, like I said before. So finally, Poketron the Voltorb said, I am constantly juggling between the SNES, Nintendo 64, or GameCube. The N64 and GameCube controllers have a wacky Nintendo-exclusive charm. The N64 controller looks like it was for an alien with 3 hands, and was technically the father of the Wii Nunchuck. The GameCube controller is a good example of shuffling the buttons correctly. The SNES does have that Nintendo charm, but in a different way. I feel like no one to my knowledge has replicated the spring and clicky hybrid of the shoulder buttons. Also, I think the SNES controller is the first controller to have a unique texture to its plastic. I think we didn't get that until the PS5 controller. Yeah, like, especially with the GameCube controller, with what you mentioned there, I definitely agree with with what you liked about it. Like, it is definitely a wacky Nintendo controller. It does have that wacky charm to it, but the button layout, like you said, is really nice. Like, in most games, you're probably mostly going to be using two of the face buttons at the same time. So I think that's great that they kind of highlighted A and B there, because those are the buttons you'll be using the most, and those are the buttons that you'll be using at the same time. And then for X and Y, those are kind of surrounding A, because you'll use those sometimes in a lot of games. If a game requires a lot of buttons, you'll definitely need them at times, but they're conveniently right next to the A button. So this is just a great game for, like, honestly, like 3D action adventure games, or 3D platformers, or Smash as well, because it's basically, like, Smash Melee, and even, like, the other Smash games were definitely designed with this controller in mind. So it's definitely great for those games as well. And even Paper Mario as well, like I mentioned before. I mean, I know Paper Mario is more of a unique case, but it's an RPG with action elements, with, like, the action commands that make use of a lot of these buttons. So I think it's perfect. Like, this is the perfect controller for the Paper Mario action commands. So I hope that the Thousand Year Door remake will have GameCube controller support. And I mean, I'm sure it will. Like, Sunshine was updated to have it in 3D All-Stars, so we'll see. And then also, the Nintendo 64 controller, yeah, it is kind of like a controller made for aliens with 3 hands. That's kind of like the most common thing I see about the Nintendo 64 controller. But that's interesting that you mentioned that it's the father of the Wii Nunchuck. That's interesting, because, like, the center of the Nintendo 64 controller, it almost kind of looks like the Wii Nunchuck, and then also the button on the back is kind of similar to the B button on the Wii Remote. That's, like, pretty interesting. That's definitely an interesting observation with the Nintendo 64 controller. But yeah, and then the SNES controller, like you said, that it's just a very solid controller overall. And I like that you mentioned that it had, like, a unique plastic to it. That's pretty interesting. I would say that there are other controllers out there that do have, like, a unique plastic texture to them, but I guess the SNES and PS5 stand out a little more in that aspect. But yeah, so those are the responses, and yeah, the next question is, what is your favorite Paper Mario enemy design from both the classic and modern games? So, like, one design from each style of Paper Mario. So let me know down in the comments. So anyways, thank you guys for watching this video. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more, and make sure to check out my Discord server and Twitter if you want to. Goodbye.